Good afternoon, wherever you may be. Welcome to another episode of Think Northwest. Uh, this is learning and tools. This is part of the pillars that we're building here at Think Northwest. And you start going through some of the processes of building something, and then you take a look at what you're building. So YouTube, for example, pulling out some key pieces of the talks that we've had recently. Um, so YouTube, go to YouTube, look at Think Northwest. We are organizing it in a way so that you can find some learning and tools. So word of mouth marketing, how to approach the advertising and marketing trades. We had a session on Nike and its impact on the Pacific Northwest. And we've got a lot of great stuff. And if you subscribe to our newsletter, thinknw.org, you'll get some of those recaps as well, and also a chance to learn. People have asked me, what's the vibe of Think Northwest? Where are you headed with all of this? So, in a lot of ways, we are an organization that's still growing, which is great, and we're unique in that we are we're in several places. So we're in Portland and Oregon, the state of Oregon. We have members in Boise now. We have members in Seattle and throughout Washington State, and we've been reaching out to people in Vancouver, British Columbia, because we find it's a very special place with a lot of very special people. And so, thinking about it as it grows and the feedback that we get from people, what is Think Northwest meant to be? It's meant to be about community. It's about connecting people. It's about continuing education, like what we're doing today. It's about connections. It's about growing your business. It's about making those connections so that you could grow your business, grow your own career, meeting people that maybe you wouldn't have met before. It's about co-creation. We go to our members to ensure that we are doing things that are relevant. And we love to hear from our members, and we love to co-create with our members. And this tumbles down into another key component, which is clarity and visibility. It's no secret that I am a huge fan of the Pacific Northwest. I love the people here. I love the talent. I love the companies. And it's incredibly important for us to continue to raise our visibility in a very clear way to not just the industry here in the region, but to places around the country and around the world. It is a special place, and we're very proud to be a small part of growing it. Now, we will get to our wonderful guest here shortly, but I do have a few pieces of housekeeping to go through. This is the event section of the opening here. We have an amazing session from MNI, Targeted Media, in Seattle. This is in person. This is a lunch and learn on Wednesday, April 19th. Hate to break it to you, print is far from dead. This is going to be a great session to dispel some of the myths and misperceptions about print, where it's headed. I think in the quote traditional aspects of advertising, print sometimes either gets ignored or it's kind of considered like one of the vinyls of advertising, and that's okay. Vinyl's great. We love vinyl. But MNI will give you this data, dispel the myths, dispel the misconceptions, and show you how you can add print to campaigns and work that you're doing already. And that is April 19th in Seattle live. That is a lunch and learn. We're going to feed you. And then after that, MNI Targeted Media and their programmatic cannabis platform, Cannabix, is hosting an extremely happy hour Thursday, 420, in Portland at 52 Limited. That's going to start at 5. That's just a chance to chill. It's a chance to get to know people. It's a chance to celebrate 420. We'll have some Pink Cloud beverages there, a CBD drink, delicious CBD drink. So make sure that you go to thinknw.org to learn more about that. And then finally, rounding out April, on April 25th, Tuesday, April 25th at 1 p.m. Pacific. This is a webinar, Retention Tension, Fixing Broken Feedback Loops. And that's some of the things that we hear related to talent in this industry. And I think you could say it in any industry, but in particular in our industry. How does one grow? How does one get opportunities? How does one feel a part of an organization? Could be an agency, could be a brand. A big piece of this is feedback, or sometimes lack of feedback, or lack of clarity in feedback. And it's a critically important aspect of retaining talent, growing talent, and attracting talent. So this is a webinar that is great for HR people, for senior leaders at agencies and brands, really anybody who's in the human side of our industry, which I would argue is everybody. But this is going to be led by Dr. Curtis Bullock, an organizational and talent consultant who works with us on a number of projects, and Kristen Johnson, a product director at Salesforce, who has a tremendous amount of experience in this area as well. So again, please join us Tuesday, April 25th, 1 p.m. Pacific. This is a webinar, so it's not going to be it's not going to be a LinkedIn Live as we usually do. This is a little bit more in depth and a little more dense. So please go to thinknw.org and you can find out more. I'm going to shut up now because Shareen, welcome. Thank you for enduring my long introduction. Please introduce yourself to everybody.
It was not that long. So I really enjoyed it.
It's like a high compliment. There we go. I love it.
The CBD drink happy hour sounded especially interesting.
Take the Delta Hipster Express on out, and
yep,
from JFK to Portland. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Great to be here. I'm Shareen Pathak. I'm the co-founder and editor-in-chief at Toolkits.com. And for those of you who don't know Toolkits, we are a new startup business media company. And we write news, stories, analysis, cover trends, original research for anyone and everyone who works in media, in publishing, and in brand content. That was very succinct.
No, that was incredibly succinct. Now, and listen, I so we were both in the trade journalism realm for a while, and always just such deep respect for the work that you did in that space, and just what you and Jack are doing right now. Anybody who will listen, I can't say enough good things about what you and Jack are doing, because it is such an interesting space that received I don't want to say like lip service, but there really wasn't a place to go to fully understand the key components of building of brand publishing in a way that was so focused, right? So I think sometimes brand publishing would be off to the side, or you might see about it at Outbound, or it's Inbound, sorry, Inbound, HubSpot's thing. So there seemed to be a lot of chaos around it, but this is such a tightly focused and dense area, and this is where a lot of brands are investing a lot of money. So real quick, before we dive into some more questions, and maybe I'm bouncing around here. So how did you and Jack Marshall decide that it was time to start Toolkits? And what did you see in the market that said, you know what, there's something here?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I'm glad you sort of hit on kind of how, narrow and specific, some people might call it niche, our sort of focus on brand publishing is. So to take a step back, I mean, we, Jack and I, a few years ago, were doing a lot of consulting and advisory work, and kind of just talking to a lot of great publishers, a lot of great brands, and working with a lot of these people, and advising them on some of the work that they're doing. And one of the themes sort of that kept coming out here, and one of the things that realized people really wanted help and advice and direction on, was this sort of idea of brand publishing. To your point, people have covered this. This has existed. By no means are we at Toolkits kind of making up a discipline or sort of coming up with one. This did not sort of start with us or does not end with us. But I think what we were realizing with sort of a lot of our advisory work that we were doing was that there was definitely something happening in the market where an increasing number of companies, and we use the term brands to refer to, non-news publishing companies. So the Nikes of the world, the apples of the world, et cetera. So we noticed an increasing number of these companies were trying to figure out how they could use content to attract customers, to put it very simply. And what they were sort of doing was kind of trying to figure out how to evolve beyond kind of the discipline of content marketing, which is
Mm.
again existed for a long time, and we could talk a little bit more about that, and go into sort of what we call brand publishing. People refer to it with all sorts of names, as is the case with most emerging disciplines, brand journalism, corporate journalism, etc. But brand publishing was sort of really being used to create, for lack of a better word, content that would attract audiences who are coming to the sites that these people were building, for the content themselves. And while we were sort of doing this consulting work, and obviously in the back of our heads as two journalists, we've
Hmm.
both been journalists for over 2 decades and worked as reporters, worked as editors. We've also sort of run kind of the business side of publishing organizations. We always had in the back of our head, like, there's an opportunity here to build a new type of publication that very specifically services this audience. And one of that specific audiences that we decided there was a chance to service really were people who were excited about building brand publishing operations inside the companies that they worked in.
Hmm.
So obviously I could talk sort of more about that, but that was really kind of on a base level. We saw a need in the market because there were people doing this, and it just made sense to connect the two and have a publication that was dedicated to being a resource for these people.
So that's great. I think one area I want to touch on, because this gets there's a lot of squishiness in we talk about terminology, we talk about specificity of terminology, and then you've mentioned content, brand publishing, brand journalism. I want to go to the J word here, journalism. Uh, you're a proper journalist. I play one on TV. Um, but
I can't
what
tell if that's a compliment or an insult, but yes.
No, it's actually quite a compliment. No, at a brief aside, I will say that probably the most important 6 years of my career was when I was in journalism, without question. I mean, I guess technically I still am, but once a journalist, always a journalist. But no, that was learning from you and through observation and others, but also being in the mix. I think what was really interesting um, is that it afforded me an opportunity to build a level of healthy skepticism that I don't think existed before. So let's go back, because the journalism piece of this keeps coming up, because I've had colleagues that have moved into brand publishing. They've moved
Yeah.
into these newsrooms, and what I've observed, whether that's accurate or not, but this is simply my observation, is that there is the theory of journalism and then the real practice of journalism. If you are going into a brand as a journalist, you're not going to be doing the same investigative things that you may have done in the past. So I want to get a take on the journalism piece of this, and why it's important for brands. And again, you pointed out that it's any company. So agencies, for example, are brands. And agencies struggle with this quite a bit.
Mhm.
Um, the journalism discipline and the importance of retaining that, as you're thinking about what brand publishing is. Walk us through a little bit of what you've observed and how it's changed and grown.
I mean, look, I think this is like the first question that, sort of that we really put to ourselves when we were trying to figure out, how do we cover this industry and this discipline and this sector as it's emerging? And what are some of the sort of most salient questions that people have? And one of the biggest questions that people had when we sort of first started writing about this a couple of years ago was like, how does brand publishing interplay with and work alongside kind of, let's call it traditional news media? Let's not even sort of get to the term journalism because I think it's
Mhm.
loaded. I think people have a lot of misconceptions about
Sure.
what it is. There's trade journalism, et cetera. So, how does this interplay with it? And I think one of the most it's interesting. We wrote, we were sort of reporting on a piece. Jack and I actually wrote this one together, and we were trying to ask people, how do these kind of lines work? And a lot of people were starting to say something really interesting. There was, and there is a pretty loud minority, let's call it a vocal minority, that were sort of, talking about using brand content as a way to sort of supersede or sidestep the media. This is happening sort of in certain corners of kind of different industries. People don't like what the journalists are saying about them. They're saying, "Oh, we can," and this term kind of kept coming up, going direct. Um,
Mm.
and going direct to your audience, et cetera. So I think, there was that, and that was, arguably, now that we've been covering it for sort of a couple years at this point, we've sort of realized over time that the more people we talk to is that is a very vocal minority. I think most people, most brands are really going into this are not doing so really with the idea that, oh, we're going to go and supersede media, we're going to sidestep it, and so on. They sort of have much more kind of, what we found were sort of more prosaic reasons for doing so.
Mm, mhm,
One
mhm.
was, customer acquisition costs were rising. It was getting more and more difficult for them to acquire customers in the ways they've been doing it. It was also proving to be less effective using sort of some of the older ways of doing it. Two, there were times that a lot of these companies operated in spaces that just weren't being covered by journalists because they weren't at that moment interesting. There wasn't something newsworthy happening. Maybe there
Mm.
wasn't a specific sort of reason to cover it. And it's funny because as a reporter, I understand that I turn down stories all the time because I just do not think that they're what our audience wants to hear about right now. I do not consider it newsworthy, whatever that means. And I think, for a variety of reasons, because people were operating in certain disciplines, people were operating in certain sectors and industries. There were things happening in their industry that the press just did not find, interesting to them to cover. A
Mhm.
lot of brands were sort of saying, "Oh, well, we'll cover it," and this isn't meant to be sort of, "Oh, well, if you don't cover it, we'll cover it." It was just, well, we'll write about it because we also have a way to reach audiences. I actually had a great journalist, somebody I actually used to work with, Natalie Zamuda,
Oh, yeah.
on the Toolkits podcast recently, and she's the global head of content at Google, so she runs all the content and brand
Mhm.
publishing that Google puts out, and she also was sort of worked on the traditional media side for
Right.
many years, which is
Small
where I
job
work.
she has right now. Very small job she
Yeah,
has
very,
right now.
very, very teeny bone job, tiny company, really. Nobody knows about it. And she said sort of something really interesting. For her, like, I'm paraphrasing here, and you should listen to the episode if sort of that's of interest. But she's like, it's a real privilege to be able to have an owned content in which we can talk to our audience. And
Mm.
obviously and in this case, the audience she was talking about were marketers because they do essentially a lot of what I would dub, trade journalism designed for
Mhm.
CMOs. And in some cases the reporting that they do and the stories they tell might look a lot like what you see on Ad Age, might look
Mhm.
a lot like what you see on Adweek. But she really considers sort of this privilege and an opportunity, and that doesn't mean sort of that they're thinking kind of differently around that, but is yet another channel. And sort of the last thing I'll say kind of on this is that I think we're living in a time where sort of the sources of information that people are looking to are varying. People aren't it's not
Mm,
The question
mhm.
is not really about, is this journalism or is it not? It is really about, where are you getting your information? And you're getting your information from a variety of places. You're getting it from print newspapers, maybe you're getting it from
Mhm.
CNN.com, you're getting it from the TV, you're getting it from TikTok. That's where I get all my news. And I don't know, it's great. You're getting it from individual creators who've decided to start newsletters. You're getting it from startup media organizations like us. And maybe you're also getting it from brands for certain things. And depending on the need you're talking about, I think there is an opportunity for some brands to be part of this kind of widening of our information diet more than not.
That is an interesting way of putting it. When I was at the Drama and Ad Week, that was actually how we had talked about it. Was, what is your diet, right? What is your trade? Back then it was what's your advertising and marketing trade diet, and trying to move yourself up the ladder a little bit, which was interesting. You brought up the Google example is very good in that what you mentioned was that level of specificity. And that's interesting because I think that brands and companies feel as though that they need to be everything to everybody all the time. And I guess what I'm curious to understand is, what are some of the brands that are doing it really well? And there could be agencies too. And then taking it perhaps a little bit, one step further, akin to the Google example. Why? What are they doing, and where are they focusing their energy so that in your mind it's effective? And if you give us just a couple of examples, I think that helps
Yeah.
contextualize it a bit.
Yeah, for sure. And again, I will sort of caveat this, like I'm looking at this as a reporter and as somebody
Yep.
who kind of sort of observes this from the outside. So sort of effectiveness is a little hard, but it's what is interesting, I think I find about, what Google's actually just one of the oldest ones. So it's sort of just
Right.
it always kind of comes to mind. I think they just celebrated their 10th anniversary. So they've just been around a really long time. I think in this market, kind of any publication with staying power is just interesting in and of itself. So I think they're really interesting. I am, uh, I think this is an obvious example, but I think what Robinhood has done and then now what it is planning to do, I think is fascinating. So what Robinhood did, Robinhood acquired a company called Market Snacks a few years ago. Market Snacks at the time was a financial newsletter. They acquired the company. They hired the founders of that company as well, and they built out Robinhood Snacks, which is a really great sort of digestible financial newsletter. It also at a point had a podcast. And it's, from what it seems like from the numbers that Robinhood has kind of divulged, it's very, very popular. I found it interesting. We actually covered this because we found it really interesting as a sign at the Times. Is there was a survey of institutional investors done a couple weeks ago, and they were asked, what news and media brands do you read the most often? And Robinhood Snacks was number one among those. So
And these
again,
are
another
institutional investors too. This isn't, yeah.
totally,
Yeah.
yeah. These are institutional investors, and that's sort of another sort of interesting that people are open to receiving news from places. And I think I do think one thing there that I think is interesting, I think it does a disservice to sort of audiences to assume that they don't understand or know that this is content presented by a brand and this is not, the same as the New York Times. I do not think that audiences are by any means getting dumber. I actually think audiences are getting very smart. And they know when something is presented by a brand that they append the obvious kind of asterisks in their head, just the way anybody would, to say, okay, Robinhood made this. We know that they have a vested interest in getting my business. Could that still mean that they have something interesting for me to say versus somebody else made this and they have a vested interest in something else that isn't the same vested interest that Robinhood has? So I think audiences know sort of the difference, and the institutional investor sort of example is a good one in that clearly they're looking at least at snacks as a viable source of information.
Sure.
And I think what Robinhood's planning on doing now is sort of spinning out snacks into sort of a different subsidiary that they're launching called Sherwood Media. And that's going to also launch more newsletters around different verticals is sort of the plan right now, as far as sort of we can tell. So I think they're really interesting in terms of what they're doing. I remain absolutely fascinated by Salesforce Plus, even though I'm not sure kind of what what is going on there, or if it's kind of
Mm,
effective, because I don't have sort of the inside news there. But I do think the idea of creating, a streaming service for business content is a fascinating one. Salesforce Studios, has the resources to make sort of videos and TV shows and so on, kind of dedicated to this. And Salesforce Plus remains kind of a super interesting one that we're watching. And they take a lot of their events and they put them on there as kind of
mhm.
these well produced, beautiful looking shows and so on. So they're all really interesting. I think as kind of just places that we've been keeping an eye on, at least.
Now, yay, awesome. Then there's the flip side of it, where and this goes to the question of investment in this, right? So I don't remember. I can't remember. You'll know better than me. So you mentioned Google, 10 years, made an investment, and have been investing into developing it and growing it.
Hmm.
Um, I think there were some recently. I think was it Slack that shuttered a couple of things.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. So, for every one of these Salesforce
Totally.
pluses, you start hearing the other side of it. And then because it is something that isn't traditional advertising,
Yeah.
sometimes that investment simply goes away, or it's not taken care of. It's not nurtured. What have you observed there? Because I, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think the Robinhood example is great, and the Salesforce example is great. And meantime, some of this decision making and some of these other and a lot of
Mhm.
this is niche areas are being tossed off to the wayside. What are you observing in the flip side of this, which
Totally.
is investment going the other way, or being completely
Oh,
curtailed?
it's I mean, there is a bloodbath or shakeout sort of happening right now. Look, like, media is a really shiny new coin for a lot of people. People get
Mm,
excited by the idea of owning a publication. People get really sort of jazzed by the idea, oh, we're going to have our own beautiful website. It's going to tell stories. We're going to hire a big journalist to run it. Look, it all sounds great. As somebody who runs a media company, media is also really hard. It's
mhm.
really, really hard to day in and day out make things. It's really hard to monetize, even if you're not monetizing sort of the traditional way. Maybe a lot of these people, maybe aren't selling advertising and so on, but they still, they need to draw audiences, etc. It's exhausting, and it's a very long game. I think for a lot of people, I
Mhm.
think what people are sort of understanding is that if you're going to go into, I think, publishing, it's not going to be something that is like a campaign mentality where it's sort of like, you do something today and then tomorrow it's on everywhere and then people see it and then they convert and then you're in business. Like, it's just not.
Mhm.
I remember just talking to a couple of sources, who are like, oh, I expect a 3 years to get sort of my ROI on this. Um, Actually, this was one of the few agencies, I think, that are kind of doing sort of something really interesting in the brand publishing space, which is Huge. And Huge
Mhm.
has a new editor in chief, Jennifer Lee Parker, who's amazing. And she sort of said, like, look, this is not going to take 5 months. This is going to take a
Right.
year, years, 3 years, and that's very difficult for people. I do think that the economic one of the things we've been covering a lot right now is sort of the economic environment and how this sort of affects this discipline, because it's a marketing discipline at the end of the day. Marketing tends to get pulled back during these times.
Mhm.
Um, I think brand publishing, it kind of depends. And in a few cases, you see people just sort of saying this isn't going to work. It no longer aligns with what I'm trying to do. In other cases, things look really good when it's boom times, but when the tide
Mhm.
goes out, you're kind of like, oh God, this publishing thing is a lot of work. Um, in other cases, publishing can be quite lean. It
Yeah.
can take a couple people, to
Right.
do a lot of work. So I think
As
for
long as you
some
set it
people,
up right, as long as it's set up right, right?
totally. And
The
I think,
process matters.
Exactly. So I think in some cases, I think there are some, some signs of that people are kind of trying to set up things right, and then it might actually do okay, because a lot of people have set this up right. They've put in the work for good editorial propositions. They have a clear mindset, and they're kind of just going to weather this out, or, and sort of make it past whatever rough patch kind of comes next. I do think though that this is going to be tough. Like, it's going to be tough for everyone, and the people who sort of, there are a lot of people who sort of thought of this exciting new world of brand publishing. Let's go in there and make a media company. I think there's going to be some pretty sort of tough tough moments ahead.
Sure. So I think managing the expectation, you've mentioned that,
Yeah.
ensuring that on the back end of everything, there's that. Now, the other thing too is, um, you know, for for any company that really believes, there's the flip side of it where it could become a self-fulfilling prophecy in a positive way, that if you latch on to something, and especially with what you and Jack are doing, like there's energy around that. So yes, I think everybody understands that publishing and media is difficult, but if you latch on to something that you think, you know what, we love this, we really believe in this, and we believe that this, could be more of a service, like service journalism, or however you want to cut it. Because I think what we're trying to do here is like, yes, there's the reality of it, but we certainly wouldn't want to dissuade anybody if they have the belief to go for it.
I mean, I'm totally comfortable dissuading people if they don't want to do it. But
Right.
I think my point is less like this is a bad time to do brand publishing, and more just that, like with anything new, this is not an easy. It's not easy, and I think we
Sure.
see a lot of people going ahead and launching things without the clear sort of goals in place, and then look, there are horrible things that happens. There are things that happen like a human cost where then you have to lay off a bunch of people because you didn't figure
Right.
out on day one that this wasn't right. And I'm not suggesting, anyone listening is sort of going to do that. But I think that that is kind of some of the things that at least we're noticing that happens when kind of people kind of just go head first into it. And again, this is true with anything, right? It's a true
Yep.
with any new project or innovation or anything that you sort of are working on. At the same time, to my earlier point, it can be for some people an exceptionally cost effective and honestly exciting way to be a brand marketer. I know that sort of, for example, we actually wrote a story about why more agencies don't do brand publishing, because
Mm,
for some agencies it feels a little bit like a no-brainer because they already have so much sort of content and expertise in their four walls. They already have so much kind of this sort of thinking and thought leadership within and they spend a lot of time actually making materials for clients. Are there
right.
opportunities where they can take a lot of that work, remix a little bit, repackage it a little bit, and turn it into true sort of stories? I think absolutely, absolutely, I think there are. Is it going to be something everyone's going to have the appetite to do? Highly doubt it. Nobody's gonna have the appetite to do everything all at once, but
Right.
at the same time, it feels like there are certain sectors and disciplines that it almost feels like a no-brainer. Like, why aren't they doing it? They should be able to do a really good job at it.
Isn't Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's interesting. And then it gets into that weird area where it's like, is that content? Again, air quotes, or is that brand publishing? Is it a little of
Yeah,
both?
I mean,
Is
I
it
think
like
that depends on sort of obviously some of this is like I'm realistic. Like some of this is just a question of semantics. I think it depends who you hire to do it. I think it depends how it's done.
yeah.
I think it depends kind of if you sort of talk about the company constantly, it's probably not, what you would talk about it.
No.
But I think there's really, I mean, it's McKinsey is actually, one of our favorite examples to talk about. We actually had also their head of publishing on the podcast just this week, and they do. I mean, the amount of work that they put out is incredible. And one thing that they do that's really
Yeah.
interesting is they take case studies, they take decks, they take everything that the partners at McKinsey make and try to find stories in them and try to find patterns in them. And the work that they
Yeah.
do is exceptional. It's
Yep.
fascinating, it's truly different, and it's very successful for them.
Yeah.
So, so I think it is possible to do without like spending a ton of money and so on. But
Right.
I think, people just have to go into it, I think, with eyes wide open.
You brought up a really good point that really effectively that's source material, and being able to story mine from that. If somebody wants to hang out with me, I can regale you with stories about the Martin Agency and my time there. And that's what we did. We were trying to find where, we had the source material. And so what would make something an interesting story that's going to be relevant? And we found a lot of really good stuff, and it was really fun and it was enjoyable.
Absolutely.
Now, let's stay on the agency track just for a second, because you've mentioned Huge. I mean, of course, we all love Chapin over at RGA and his Twitter feed, and yeah, you could argue that's like brand publishing to some degree. But let's hone in on an agency, just the agency community for a second. If an agency has never done brand publishing, how do they even get started? What have you observed in your time and what you've researched and what you've covered? A couple of ideas on, and we've covered a few of them, but in your mind, because you'd look at brand publishing as this massive mountain to scale, but the fact is there's plenty of stuff going on around Basecamp that they should be paying attention to. Sorry, that was a very Pacific Northwest reference, by the way, mountains and base camps and things like that. But what are some of the pieces of advice when people just look at and go, I don't even know how to begin?
Yeah, no, good question. We have mountains I feel like we have hills in New York. We don't have
You have very
mountains.
large hills. No,
Right?
the Adirondacks
Like
are nice.
just
The
like a little,
Catskills.
I was thinking of like the Great Hill in Central Park. So
Oh, there
little
you go.
slope,
No, yeah, you
little
got hills.
slope.
Yeah.
No, that's a really good question. It's funny. We, one of the things that we try and do at Toolkits is obviously we're kind of covering these stories, but we also kind of do think like practical guidance is really kind of an important part of what we offer. So we actually have a bunch of guides that we, did on the site, where we sort of talk about, and these are all kind of reported, so we talked to a bunch of practitioners, asked them what they were doing. We have a bunch of guides on the site, and one of the guides sort of that we have is like a little bit of where to get started. It's like, oh, how do you set up a brand publishing strategy? And some of the things there are kind of obvious, I think, to anybody in who's already sort of done content or journalism, but isn't to people. I think one thing is starting to think about your potential sort of your not just your potential customers and your current customers as audiences versus thinking of them as customers. So I think that's sort of like a number one thing. So once you start thinking of these people's audiences, who is your audience? How are you going to define who that audience is? How are you going to define kind of what they're sort of needing? And one thing we've seen that's interesting with brand publishing is that some brand publishing educates and some brand publishing entertains. And you can do both. You could do just one. So sort of what are the needs that you are going to fulfill with what you offer? And I think having a really clear sense of those audience needs and wants, and this is actually really arguably really easy for people who work in marketing, right? They work on this all day. They work on consumer personas all day. But I think sort of trying to think of your customers that as audiences first and foremost, and then taking yourself out of it and just saying, how can we answer their questions? Well, are we equipped to answer the questions that they have or answer the needs that they have? I think that's a really, really great place to start. I think once you sort of start there and have that down, then I think it's a matter of kind of, structuring a team. And I do think one of the things that people do well is kind of structure a separate publishing team that it can be tiny. It can be 2 people. It's fine, but they are separate. They're different from, the rest of the marketing group. They do different work. And I think starting to structure that team in a way that sort of lets them just focus in and out on these audiences. And I think the third thing that's a really good place, I think, to start in all of this and doing it in parallel with all of this is that have a really clear sense of what this is going to do for you. Like, is the goal, I think for most people, the goal is, okay, we want lead generation. We want
Mhm.
people to come to our site. Okay, but what is a funnel going to look like? Where are people going to come in from? And what are you going to do
Right.
with that? Are you going to, are you going to have a registration wall? Are you going to try and actually make money off the publishing thing? That's not unheard of. That's also a potential possibility. But I think having very clear sense of goals of what it is that you're doing and how does it link to the business that you work for is probably the best way to ensure your own survival. I think it's like, let's just make sure that this is actually answering the business needs. This is what it needs to do, and this is how it's going to do it. But I think having those three key ways would be just a really good start. And again, I think it's all free to read. We have a bunch of resources on the site if anybody wants to take a look at them.
They are amazing resources, by the way. And then we're
Thanks.
going to close. And if anybody has any questions, just pop them in the comments before we wrap up here. What's a trend or two that you're seeing that excites you in brand publishing right now?
I mean, I think I wouldn't say excites me. I think just what's happening with generative AI. I think, taking out before everyone just dozes off. I I am interested, as much as everybody else is, in sort of generative AI and how it's going to transfer in kind of content creation and efficiency and operations. That's fine. I think what is really going to be interesting, and we're seeing publishers, kind of traditional publishers, start grappling with this, is how this sort of changes how people consume information. Again, this is, I keep talking about things we've done, which is good, but like, we just did a report kind of looking ahead to Q2 and just asking people, like, what is on your minds as you look at Q2? And, everybody's sort of thinking, yes, I am interested in figuring out how to sort of integrate AI into what I do. But what I'm really wondering is that what happens when people are able to have their queries answered by a chatbot and don't have to come to my site to have that query
Mm,
answered.
mhm.
Publishers already know this is, a lot of publishers live and breathe by people typing in things into Google, and then they're coming to their site to have those answered. Brand publishers do the same. A lot of brand publishers have a lot of expertise. They are able to sort of use that search traffic. A lot of people rely on that. There's going to be sort of good enough answers, on chatbots that potentially kind of just take that out of just the equation entirely. And I think it does have the ability to potentially just threaten sort of entire publishing strategies in a way that's very
Mm,
existential. Um, that's going to be a long way, but I think what'll happen now is sort of we'll see people kind of starting to think about what this means and how they're going to sort of, whether they're going to sort of figure it out, how they're going to change their own strategies. I don't know. But I think that's something that is very, very interesting, and obviously something that we are kind of covering very, very closely.
right. Well, I'll reveal that I'm actually an AI. Doug's over there, so he's been over there the
I
whole
could
time.
tell.
Yeah,
I
right.
could tell the whole time.
Yeah, I am a robot. Um, no, and we'll definitely keep track of that, because that is an interesting, perplexing, and dare I say noisy space at the moment. I mean,
Very. Oh my
does it
gosh.
have a little whiff of NFT to it?
Very much. And, like, of course, there's AIs already here, et cetera. And there's a lot of, I think somebody was saying, we're inundated. Like, we get pitches every day on, like, oh, here's a chatbot that's going to solve your content problems. So,
Right.
I think you remember this from covering sort of the old ad tech days. This is
Oh, gee.
it's always how it is with any new thing. But I do think sort of the existential threat here is, at least to me, much more interesting, kind of just, and I think something that more people should be thinking about if they aren't already.
You gave me a flashback covering ad tech, because I wrote one article about account-based marketing during my time at the Drum, and ahoy, the floodgates opened on pitches. I see that you are
Exactly.
an expert on account-based marketing. I'm like,
It's like, yes, I
"What?"
absolutely am. I'm absolutely
Oh,
one.
yeah. Why don't you read, so out of 100 articles, one was ABM, 99 of them were about creative or agencies.
Yeah, like creative
Yeah.
space.
Oh, it gives me a little bit of a shiver, but that's
PTSD.
okay. Shareen, thank you so much for
You're
joining us.
welcome. Great to be
Again,
here.
I cannot I cannot say enough great things about what you and Jack are doing, and I strongly, strongly encourage everybody. Toolkits.com. Even if you're not in the space yet, uh, get yourself churched up a bit, because this is going to give you the tools that you need, no pun intended, to make some real decisions, or to go to your leadership and to say, we need to do this. This is good for our business. And I would say that Shareen and Jack and Toolkits are the preeminent destination for all of this. So make sure you're
That is so
bookmarking them,
nice.
signing up for the newsletter, which is always dense and fantastic. Shireen, thanks so much for joining us, and
Thank you so much.
we'll check in with you later. We'll check in with you later.
This is
We'll
great.
check in
Thank
with you
you.
later. You bet. All right, thank you everybody for joining us. A reminder of our slate of stuff coming up. Hate to break it to you, print is far from dead. This is happening live in Seattle, Wednesday, April 19th. Our 420 Extremely Happy Hour. Ha ha ha. I'm sure the playlist will have No Fish or The Dead on it. That's happening Thursday, the 20th of April in Portland. Those are both hosted by M&I Targeted Media. The happy hour also hosted by Cannabix. And finally, a webinar for talent, HR, and agency and brand leaders. Retention Tension, fixing broken feedback loops. Definitely sign up for that so you can learn how to help your talent thrive. On behalf of everybody at Think Northwest, including our wonderful board, who I send my love to all the time, I'm Doug Zanger, Executive Director of Think Northwest, and we will see you next time.